Welcome to my workshop on board game photography, getting better images of your gaming sessions. I'm Scott Mansfield, and this was recorded for the San Diego Online Historical Convention presented by Harold Buchanan. I hope you enjoy. So we're going to talk about what your story is. The story is the most important thing. It's what drives all your technical and creative decisions moving forward. Your story can be anything. It can be a fun example of play that you're doing. It can be an interesting event or situation that just happened. It can be a reason why you're pulling out your phone. You're taking your phone in your pocket for a reason, and that reason is your story. Some things to keep in mind: uh, where's it going to go? Okay, after you pull your camera out. Ask yourself not only what your story is, but also where's it going. Is it the text message? Some gamer friends. Is it to go on social media? Are you calling out a publishing company like GMT or Academy Games, saying, "Hey, look, I'm playing your game"? Is it going to go on BGG? Is it going to go a little bit of all these places? That's something to keep in mind. The story can be, here's three GMT images, and they're all three different stories. The one on the left, obviously, is Combat Commander. If you haven't played it, events via the cards are a big driver of the narrative. Well, as you can see, everything else is out of focus, but that event is in focus. So your eye goes right to the event. I'm calling out a particular thing that's happened. Okay, in the middle, we have Andean Abyss, and it's if you've ever played any of these coin games, you understand they can get kind of messy. There's a lot of pieces going on. There's a lot of interaction, and this is a case where I'm showing that specific interaction. If I were to pull out and show the whole board, it may look kind of confusing, and your viewer won't know exactly what it is that you're trying to show them. On the right, again, I'm calling out a specific piece. I haven't played this that much, so this was a product shot I did for the game Grand Prix, but I'm calling out the specific car. It's an interesting little vignette within the larger game. If I were to pull back and pair this with text to say, "Hey, look at Indy car number 2," but you see the whole board, you may get lost in that kind of confusion. So think of, when you pull out your camera and you're going to take an image, ask yourself what the story is, and on top of that, where's it going? What's the purpose of the image? Again, here's two images. We have both by Mark Simonich, Ardennes 44 on the left, and the recent Caesar on the right. The one on the left is a big game. If you've ever played it, it's two maps. It takes up a huge table. What I'm showing here is a call out, basically a call out to the game, call out to GMT. Hey, look, GMT, I'm photographing your game. Look how cool the map is. An image like the one in the middle, Andean Abyss, if I'm saying, "Hey, look how cool the map is," isn't going to work because you can't see the map. It's not about the map. It's about the specific situation that's happening. Here with Ardennes, it's about the map, and the map is huge. The Germans have to get all the way to the north, and the Allies have to stop them. So that's what that story is. It's about it's about the whole Battle of the Bulge all in one image. The one on the right is more a vignette. We're talking about beautiful artwork on a nice background, cool cards. I don't know the game well enough yet to comment on exactly what it is that the narrative should be. But in this case, I put this on social media to say, "Hey, look, I'm playing Caesar." I styled it a little bit, but there's a little vignette of Caesar, like a little bit of a taste. It's not showing you the whole thing. Another thing to keep in mind when you're telling your story is asking yourself, what is the text that's going to accompany it? If you're on Twitter or Instagram, you have, there's captions. If this goes on BGG, they require that you have a caption. And oftentimes that caption can enhance your image. You often find people will post an image like this, say this is of Labyrinth, and they'll say, "Hey, look, I'm playing Labyrinth," or "This is Labyrinth." Well, that's fine. That's what it is that you're doing, but that doesn't really enhance the story. This is a game that my brother Bruce and I played a couple years ago, and if you know anything about Labyrinth, you know that 2 teraplots in the United States is a very bad thing. And I happen to be playing the Jihadists, and one of those is a terror number 1, and one of those is a WMD. Okay, so that the accompanying text is one of the 2 teraplots is a WMD. He had a single 3-op card, which means he can flip one of those. He chooses wrong and he loses the game. That's a very interesting story. What happens? It's a mystery there. If I were to pull back with that text and show you the whole board, you're going to get lost in the confusion. You're not going to necessarily notice the United States. So what I did was I came in very close. We highlight just those 2 teraplots. You add that text, and that's an interesting story. Okay, here's a completely different story to go talking to about having a prototype. This is an older game called Mosby's Raiders, and this is last year, I redid all the cards. It's just a fun little side project. This is something I'm calling like, hey, look, I did these interesting cards. I have the deck backs on the left, and I spread out a couple cards on the right just to show you what they all look like. If I were to do a selective focus, like the one on the right with that IndyCar, if I were to do that with the cards, it doesn't really showcase the artwork and the cards and the design. And the design is what I spend a lot of time with. So that's what I'm trying to show people. It's cropped in. All you see is the cards. It's quite obvious this image is about the cards. It's not about gameplay. It's not about the company. It's not about a play I did with a friend. It's specifically about those cards. Okay. I really cannot stress enough the importance of understanding, or at least asking yourself what your story is. A lot of people want to talk about photography. They want to go right to equipment, or they want to go right to technicals. And all that doesn't matter unless you know what it is you're trying to say and what it is you're trying to do. I do a lot of, like I said earlier, game photography specifically for GMT to help them sell more games. So the story in that is I'm trying to sell their games through better images. And I do that. I'll show you some examples later that kind of showcase what that looks like. But that's the story in that is to get good images, get decent images of their titles. So ask yourself what the story is, and then we'll work forward. So that's why I wanted to start with this. Moving on, the next thing is avoiding some pitfalls. Now, the pitfalls are the problems that can arise, or the situations that arise when either you don't know your story, you don't know what you're trying to say, and you just whip out your camera and you just start shooting without kind of any thought process behind it. And I'm going to poke on one of our favorites. This is a Mark Herman image on the left, something he posted a while ago. And here's the text that accompanied it. Here's how I unwind after a weekend of gaming at GMT East. Play Empire of the Sun, and watch Tor, and oh yeah, I'm drinking scotch. That's a great story. I mean, that's really a cool story. Empire of the Sun, fantastic game. Mark Herman, legend of the hobby, watching Tor. What's he want to do after a full day of gaming is come back to his hotel room and play more and have a little drink and watch a cool movie. Unfortunately, the image on the left doesn't really portray that. What it portrays, what's your eye go to immediately? It goes right to that open door, and you have the bright screen on the left, and you have the game on the right. I don't see the drink anywhere. There's a lot of ways you can fix this, and I added just the two ones that came to mind. The issue, the story does not match the image. The fix is just take two images. You take one of the photo and you take one of the game. Here's a case where you can't necessarily rearrange the hotel room to make a better image. But what you could do is you could take a cool picture of just the movie and a picture of just the game, okay, with the drink. And in fact, if you turn that desk lamp on, you're going to highlight the game with a nice little ring of light. And then you combine them later with really easy programs that are embedded in your phone to make a diptych. And that diptych then has an image left and right. And pair that with that text, and it's going to make a lot more sense. Okay, here's another game. This is one of my images. It's one of my favorite games. This is by John Butterfield. The Enemy Actions Ardennes. Text that accompanied it. I love AAA's combat shit pull system. So clever. Cool little, nice little text, like a nice little caption to it. I don't see any of the combat shit anywhere on the board. This shows you this shows you the setup. I mean, this is the setup of the game. So where is it? Okay, well, what do? You just go in and you isolate it. You isolate just those combat counters. Hey, look, this is a very cool, cool chit pull system that handles the combat. That tells the story. That does not tell the story. Now, I hope this isn't somebody's image. I pulled it off Board Game Geek, and I apologize if you happen to be sitting here, but what is the subject here? Okay, they're playing Combat Commander, but I don't see anything. I mean, I don't see, I see a guy off the left shuffling, and I see Combat Commander on the thing. There was no text with this, and so I don't know exactly what it is that they're trying to say. Just come right into it. There's no reason why this light here doesn't work for here. Now, this happens to be an image. This is one of my images that I lit purposely. It's a little bit harder edge, but the only thing that's going to change is the soft light won't have a nice hard edge shadow. But what this does is this isolates both two cards and a game situation. Look, we're playing Combat Commander. This is amazing. This is really evocative. This is creative. This is narrative. This game is all about all those things. How do you showcase that? This doesn't really do that. It's very jumbled. You're not isolating. So one of the major pitfalls is not isolating your subject. You get subject confusion. And this is very confusing. And this is very isolating. You know exactly what it is that's being shown. Okay. Here's a technical problem, distracting reflections. I get questions about this all the time. This I have set up at the moment. It's called, Empire of the Sun. I happen to have a giant window right to the back of it. And window light is fantastic, except the sheen on top of counters is not very fantastic. The sheen will reflect basically what's called equal to the angle of incidence. So the window light is in front of me and it bounces off that counter and reflects right into the camera. Unfortunately, without say blocking out that light or shifting the table so the light comes from a different direction, the only way to quickly solve this is to change your angle. And to change your angle, you just go overhead. This is the same image. This is the same setup that this was. This was a 5-second fix. This is from sitting at the table at my, the 4.5 feet or 5 feet, sitting at eye level, pull out the camera, pull out my iPhone, take a picture of that. It's very distracting. There's very little contrast. Boom, same thing. All I did was I stood up and I went over the board, and then immediately I didn't change anything else. I didn't change the lighting. I didn't change the camera. All I changed was my angle to that. Okay, so look out for reflections. Here is another bigger game called Stellar Horizons. This is a huge game, and it required, I think, a bigger image to showcase that you're playing the whole solar system. Didn't take much. All I did was stood on a chair. There's no fancy lighting. There's no fancy cameras. Just standing on a chair to get overhead to show the scope of the game. The stuff that's cropped out on the left and the right actually adds. We're going to talk about cropping here in a little bit. You don't need to have everything in the scene, essentially. Don't be afraid to crop. Cropping adds interest. Breaking those lines. You see the table is cantilevered. That's the camera just shifting a little bit. So those what you want to be really aware of is having parallel lines. So you shoot the edge of the table, and the edge of the table is parallel to the frame of the camera. You want to be careful of that. You want to just rotate a little bit. You want to have it off axis. It just adds a little extra interest. Stand up and shoot to get a bigger perspective. Okay. Cropping. Here's an image of GMT's Tank Duel. The story here is just a little move action, super little move action. Nothing too complex, nice little narrative. It's nothing to be aware of. Your story doesn't have to be complex. It can be something very simple. Very cool artwork, cool cards. I don't need to see the whole board. I don't need to see all 4 or 6 tanks. I also don't need to see that infantry advance card off to the right or the little edge of the other Panzer tank down to the bottom left. So here's my idea. Here's how I shot this horizontally. I decided to crop it in. You crop it in, you get rid of all those distractions, and you're left with a cleaner image. Your eye doesn't wander off to the right or to the extraneous information that can't really be adjusted. One thing to keep it, so a lot of these examples I'm showing you, this is all window light, by the way, or desk lamp light. There's no fancy lighting that's been added to this. I'll tell you if there's been any kind of fancy professional lighting. This is just, this is window light. I just stood up, okay? So lighting, let's see here. Okay, so cropping. Oh, we'll get back to that in a second. Okay, so just to go over them just one more time really quickly, we can subject confusion, not isolating your subject or telling your story. Make sure that that what you say about your image matches your image, and they can support each other. That's really important. In fact, a lot of places where you put these images, Board Game Geek or Twitter, Facebook, or texting your friends, you're often going to have text. So be aware of what text you're adding to the photos. Okay. Lack of styling, lack of subject confusion. That's not matching the text, the story. You're not really sure what it is. So subject isolation. Again, what's the subject? Isolating your subject, okay? And a little light and shadows and so forth. Okay, so let's move on to perspective and subject isolation. Okay, these two things are incredibly important. I want to go over the pitfalls that kind of give you an idea what's going to lead into this, because this is going to be kind of how you go about those other two things, or kind of go about how you go about those various pitfalls. Story is super important. It's the most important. How you isolate your subject is the second most important. So once you know your story, focus in on it. Okay. Story: Bruce's game, my brother's game, Gandhi, top right. Okay, really get in there. You're isolating that strike. You're isolating a little vignette of play. This is just a vignette of play. There's nothing else going on here. It's just a nice vignette of play. There's no other distractions to it. The left, I really wanted to show the pulled back view of the last 100 yards. This is a very fun game and has these great geomorphic boards that this particular scenario, they're paired and it's super long. And this is, it's visually very cool. If I were to get in on just one board, you wouldn't necessarily see that. That's not the story I wanted to show. I wanted to show the full thing. And this was a set. This is a game. This is either mid game or a start. I can't remember. But this was not. I don't think this was for the actual photo shoot for the game. This was a game that Bruce and I were playing. Stood on a chair and just did some light styling to adjust the cards, make sure that some of the counters were kind of clean, adjust the counter cups and the dice tray, and that's it. Again, isolating the subject. You have dominant species in the top left. Very cool pieces. Perspective. Perspective is at an angle. One of the things I've found is that flat cardboard doesn't always make the best 3/4 angle. So standing at an angle and shooting down to the board, cardboard can look quite flat. So you'll see quite often like this combat commander image in the top right. I like to stand, when it's a hex encounter game, I tend to stand over it and shoot down on it, just because often, like I said, the cardboard can be kind of flat. Now, another example of it not being over is down on the bottom left. You see the units coming out of the United Kingdom for the game Cataclysm. Hyper selective focus. Now that was done with a DLSLR, so I could better focus the image, but I can show you guys how to force focus with your iPhones or other like phones. So that way I isolated that and didn't have to really worry so much about it coming off flat because the focus kind of takes care of that. And then Star Wars Outer Rim on the bottom right. Who doesn't like Boba Fett? Again, isolate Boba Fett. Hey, look, so-and-so, I'm playing Outer Rim. Boba Fett's awesome. That's the story, and that's all the story had to be. Again, if I were to stand up and shoot that, you would see the whole board plus all the background, plus the kitchen and whatever else is in the back. You don't need all that stuff. As a photographer, and yes, if you pull out your camera to take an image, you are a photographer. You are responsible for everything within that scene. So if it looks like dirt, it is dirt. I don't care if it's an empty mug or a mug filled with coffee. If it's distracting, it's your responsibility to take care of that. Okay, on the left, isolating, I can't remember what game this was on the left, but I believe you pull those counters and those do various activations. So you can activate all the orange units. This was a post-production little trick. This was shot, again, iPhone, standing over the board, a little bit at an angle because you can see the soft focus in the background. So the perspective is slightly standing up. I wanted to isolate the subject of that counter pull, of that activation counter. And so this little trick is I just vignetted and I put a little vignette so it isolated that counter. The vignette is done in post-production and you can be done on the edit screen on any phone. This one happened to be in a program called Lightroom, which I'm happy to talk about, but it can be done on your phone. I do a lot of vignettes on the phone. In fact, the image on the right of Doolittle Raid the vignette was done on the phone. And again, I wanted to isolate just the bombers at ready. And to get that kind of forced focus, this is one on the phone, I pulled back, I zoomed in and tapped on the screen, and we can talk about that more in a little bit, and that forces the focus to wherever it is you tap. And if you hold down, it'll lock that focus in. You can even further affect focus with any of your post-production tools in any of the edit suites, including the edit suites that come with the phones. Okay, so this kind of leads right into styling. Quick question, am I going too fast? Anybody can pipe in and say yes, and I'll try to slow down. Okay, I'll take that as I'm good to go. So styling is, I pulled it out as a separate thing. It really does want to live with subject isolation, because all styling is just being mindful of everything in your image. It's cleaning up anything you see that's extraneous around your board. It's adjusting counters. It's adjusting player aid charts. It's using human hands. It's telling your friend or your family is playing to back off, or to throw a hand in. It's anything that adds or takes away from your image. I know those are two counter things. So you can add stuff to the image for styling, like a hand going in, or you can remove something, a hand or a cup and so forth. So example of styling on the left and the right. Again, I apologize. I pulled these images off Board Game Geek, and if they happen to be yours, my apologies, but we're going to poke at you for a second. These are great examples of poor styling, but it's a very popular kind of image to do, which is an exploded box image. Here's the contents of the box. This is what comes with it. Very cool. And that's a neat image. I like looking at them. And before I buy a game, I often go and look for this stuff because I want to see what goodies are in the box. Okay, I took it, and this happens. These are both images that are for GMT. Okay, and so they are professionally lit, and they're used with a camera that's about 6 feet overhead. But these are styled pretty heavily. Okay, I'm not saying that you guys have to take it to this extent. This is a professional extent where I probably spend a good hour and a half per each of these images. I'm not implying that any of you guys or gals have to do that. I'm just showing you what styling does to the very same products. We have Combat Commander on the left, and we have Combat Commander on the left here as well. This isolates all the individual elements, and to get that little shadows behind seemingly flat objects like the maps and the counter sheets, is I just slip a little piece of cardboard underneath, and that pops up those flat elements. Again, this is an extreme example. You don't have to take it this far, but it could be taken this far if you have a table and a way to stand over it. You don't need fancy lighting for this. It's just being mindful of styling. So for instance, just to give you an example, I don't have an example of an image that I did before and after the styling, but so the Combat Commander one on the left, the Combat Commander rulebook was parallel. I didn't like that, so I countered a little bit. Again, with the counter sheets, there were also the edges of the counter sheets were parallel, so I countered those a little bit, just to add a little bit of interest. Same with the cards, they were all parallel, so I just rotated those. And the maps, you can kind of see they're kind of wonky, but they're wonky in a pleasant kind of way. They're not wonky in a necessarily messy kind of way where they're just thrown on the table. I was very mindful of trying to have the text of the combat shown. You show a little bit of each of the maps that you want to entice people. Again, and also I'm not showing every little thing. I'm not showing all the counter sheets. You don't have to. You're just showing like a little taste of what's inside. And that's why I have no problem layering objects on top of each other. The rules of play for Imperial Struggle on the right is layered on top of that playbook with a little piece of foam core, and that gives a shadow. It gives depth. Any shadow around the edges is going to give depth to any flat piece of cardboard. And again, I just want to reiterate: you don't have to take it as far, but being mindful of styling, adjusting what doesn't look well. You can take a couple minutes, even when you're playing with your friends or your family, and you want to say, "I'm going to take a photo." Take a quick look around the screen and see what distracting elements there are there and pull them out. Okay, styling can be anything. Here's the same game, left and right. One is mid-play, a little bit of a thumb focus. This is with this is with my phone. I'm focusing on the cards. The board in the background doesn't matter if it's in focus. In fact, it shouldn't be in focus because the focus should be on the play. Here's a really cool hand of cards. In the game, you're playing, you know what game you're playing because it's gonna, I posted this and I added the text of what game I'm playing. So the game in the background is almost irrelevant. It's just there as a little extra, but the styling is the thumb. I added a little human element. Again, on the right, it goes I talked briefly about you can take interesting photos of anything. There's a package in the mail that I ripped open with packaging materials, not lit, not lit with fancy lighting, just a giant window, and just being mindful of styling. What I did do was I styled it. I pulled the game out obviously slightly, and I tucked in some of the wrapping underneath it. And this was just a simple image I sent to a gaming text group that I'm part of. It's like, hey, look, cool prize for Tuesday. It doesn't matter if it's just to a couple buddies or to social media, where if you have a couple thousand followers, you should be always be mindful of giving and presenting the best images possible, even if the image is just you ripping open a package, because that is an enticing image. If I just laid that, that game board, or I'm sorry, that game box on the table and shot it, yes, I could add the text and say, hey, I got a cool prize on Tuesday, but this has a little more mystery. It's like Christmas, and it's like a birthday present, and you always get that little excitement at a birthday or a Christmas present, and this kind of just enhances that. Again, being mindful of styling, ancient civilizations of the inner sea. Now, this kind of calls out something else I did. Now, this was for GMT. This is one of the professional shots for the game itself. I wanted to do kind of a hard, cold background, so I shot it on cement floor. No one's going to play on cement floor. I can't think of a more uncomfortable playing surface to actually sit on, but visually it's kind of cool. And so in this case, the style is the background. Now we can talk about backgrounds a little bit. It is one thing that can make your games pop. It's also the hardest thing for you guys to adjust on the fly, because unless you're mindful of it before you put the game down, or you really care that much, then you're not going to really worry about the game surface before you start playing. So the backgrounds you can kind of put in the back of your head, but just be aware that there are some cool backgrounds that can really enhance an image. And again, talking about styling here, the cards in the bottom right and the top right, I cropped into them. That's fine. The rules are cropped into. I wanted to show all the cards on the right because those are kind of an extra feature of the game. You can build these things. And so I thought, I'm not going to crop those out because it's an important feature, but the playing cards, they don't need to be in. The sequence of play at the bottom, that doesn't need to be in. The styling in this case was making sure that the piles looked okay. And again, that didn't take more than a couple minutes to make sure that the purple was scattered, but not too scattered, and same with the green and so forth. I didn't want the cards on the board, on the map itself, to be parallel. Those are all things you can do. If, like I said earlier, you're probably not going to be aware of or mindful of adjusting your background, but you pull out to shoot an image like this, you're standing on a chair, you've already stood on the chair to shoot this, just take a couple extra minutes and adjust some of the player aids in the map or the rule book and maybe the cards. Be aware of parallel lines, being aware of anything that's distracting. You can always put it right back. If there's extra cups that just aren't doing it for you, take them out and put them back and continue your play. Okay, so that's kind of the base, that basically talking about styling. Just think of styling as cleaning up your image or adding any little extra bit that will enhance it. This is kind of a colder image in the sense that there isn't any human elements, and that's purposeful. I don't have models that getting on a professional side, you really want a decent hand model if you're going to use hands. So that's actually that's a good point that Brittany talk about. If you do have hands in your image, be mindful of how they look, how the hair looks, the nails. I'm not asking you guys to get manicures before you play your games. It's just that people will see a hand that doesn't look very well, and that's what's going to be called, and that's what visually people are going to call out in their mind. They're going to see that before they see a cool image of a game. So, okay, let's move on to light and shadow. Okay, so light and shadow. Photography is all about light. I don't care what kind of light it is. It's all about light. And light and shadow. So light is something that's very easy to adjust. Here's a very simple tool. I recommend everybody here go out and make one. This is maybe a 8x10, 8x11 foam core from the art store. Cost a couple bucks. I glued the back so I could have it stand up on itself. All this is doing is kicking light back in. It's called a fill card. And the primary light, or what's called the key light, is going to be where the most the light's coming from. If you're playing by a big window during the day, it's going to be your window. If you're playing on a desk with a lamp at night, it's probably going to be your desk lamp. If you have a fill like this, you can fill in shadows and adjust contrast. Put your fill light, put this card opposite whatever your main light is. So in this case, the window light is bouncing into that fill card and it's filling in the shadows. Okay, what you see, what your eye sees, whether it's outside in the daylight or under these tungsten lights or by the window light, you guys can see into dark shadows. Your camera cannot. Your camera only sees a limited range. So if you can bring those ranges within reason, then it's just going to be a little bit more pleasing and less dark black holes in your image. Here's an example of my play space. Now, this was not an image that was done for GMT. This was done specifically as an example that I then posted on Twitter to say, just to show that with the basic of equipment, iPhone and one fill card, what this does. You have a window light source. I turned off the desk lamp because I didn't want warm, glowy light. I put the fill card to bounce light back into to the blocks. The heavier shadows off to the right where that green circle is, it's not being affected by the fill card as much. You can see the difference between the units in the middle and the pieces off to the right. And so when I photographed it, I photographed just the middle portion. Super easy, super fast. Yeah, so that basically, talks about the shadows with window light. Okay, same game in the evening. Now this was shot again with the iPhone with, no, I'm sorry, this was shot with my DSLR because I wanted to force the focus. The light is just a flashlight. That's it. A flashlight that's held a little bit overhead and a little bit in front, just so I could light slightly the elephants. Everything else, black, because it's cool, because I want to highlight those elephants. Again, I just held the light with one hand and shot it with the other hand and let the dark areas fall off because the interest, the story was about the masked elephants, Carthage's elephants storming the battleground. That's the story. And so I removed the distractions of the entire play surface. I'm not showing you my chair. I'm not showing you what I'm drinking. I'm isolating the most important feature, at least what I thought the most important feature of this particular scenario was, the most interesting, which was the elephants. So I focused on them both with the camera, but I also focused on them with the light. Again, using a single flashlight here. I'm going to show you a little trick here coming up in another slide about how to get this little bit of a slice of light. Again, in this case, I used 2 cards and a flashlight to get this little streak. I didn't have to do that, but what this does is it isolates that night feature. And if you ever played Ardennes 44, those night counters are really important for the Germans. And if you know that, this image makes a lot of sense. Both, it's also dark, kind of goes along with the night, but it also calls out that night feature. I'm isolating that night counter. The story is this night counter. I'm isolating it. I'm removing all the distractions. I don't have to show you the entire German front line. I'm going to show you what the story is. It's just about that counter. Again, lighting here on the left is a giant window light, and I did not want to fill in the window light here because I really liked how the shadows were looking on the darker units. On the left, Clothing Twilight. On the right, is it the Virgin Queen, or is it? I think it's Here I Stand. The one on the right, Here I Stand, is I blocked out the light from the top right and the bottom left, and I had one streak of light coming down the middle. I wanted to highlight Calvin, and so that's what I did. I highlighted Calvin. I did it with light. If I had removed that and it was the same brightness across the whole image, it would, even though it was out of focus, it would still be kind of distracting. And so I just reduced that light, and I reduced it with cards. And I'll show you how you do that in a second. This was, again, another Cataclysm image, and this is both isolated in focus and with shadow. Poland, very interesting little vignette, a little moment. This is just the start, basically, of Barbarossa. You can see that tank going in. That's the story. The rest of Cataclysm, the Pacific side, all the extra cards, it doesn't matter because that wasn't the story I was trying to tell. I wanted to show somebody, hey, look, this is happening on the Polish front. This is very cool how this XYZ is being modeled. Here's this example of it. Okay, shadow example. So here's 2 cards. Okay, I put 2 cards together, and on the right, lit them with a simple flashlight, and that's the effect. That's just a couple bucks if you're interested. It makes it really interesting. Here is the Japanese invasion of Hawaii, and again, if I was going to shoot this, I pulled this back to show you the effects of the cards, but the actual image is going to be much closer in. I don't need to see all the extraneous information. I just want to see that little battle happening. So you just put 2 cards and you put a light on it. Some of this, some of these little techniques may seem far-fetched if you're in the middle of a game, especially if you have more players, they may eye roll at you. They may, they may get up, or they may support it. It doesn't really matter. It's up to you how much energy you want to put into it. Your images, the more energy you put into it, the more time you put into it, the better your images are going to be. And so if you can stomach it, say, hey, I need 5 minutes. I want to shoot this. Pull out your cards, pull out your flashlight, take a cool image, put them away, and you're good to go. You keep moving on. You're there for a couple hours anyway. Why not take the little extra couple minutes to get a better image? Okay. And we'll finish up talking briefly about post-production. Most cameras have, here's just a screenshot of the native iPhone post-production editing suite. If you go on your photos folder, I'm sure it's the same on any other phone, and you hit edit, you're going to come up with various various editing tools. The ones you want to be aware of, the ones that I'm aware of, whether I'm editing in iPhone or I'm editing on Photoshop, here are in these my main workflow in order of operation. I crop out unwanted elements. If I wasn't able to crop in camera, like I was showing you earlier, then I'll crop in post-production. I add a little contrast, and that's why on the image on the left, I have that highlighted as showing the contrast. I increase shadow detail. Again, another one of the buttons. You just select it. And what I mean by increasing shadow detail is I brighten the shadows up. I take away density. I increase the brightness of the shadows. And then consequently, there's something called a black point on the image on the left. It's that far right circle with a little dot in the middle. I drop the black point. I make the black point darker by just 1 or 2 points. I open the shadows and I drop the black point just a little bit. Talking about color, that's going to be kind of up to you to color balance and or saturation. I tend not to adjust saturation, but I will adjust color balance. And typically it looks like a little thermometer, a little colored thermometer. And color balance is the color of the light that's lighting your image. Daylight, like a nice big window light, is going to be slightly on the blue side because it's being reflected with the blue sky. Unless it's overcast, then it's going to be more neutral. Your inside lights, unless you have daylight balanced tungsten or daylight balanced LED lights, they're going to be on the much more warmer side. And you may like that. You may want to keep it on the warm side, but your color balance slider is going to adjust that. And then again, the saturation I typically leave alone because I find oversaturated images to be kind of gross, but go ahead and play around with it. And then finally, vignetting, and you'll find vignetting, at least on the iPhone, at the very far right. And what vignetting does is it darkens or brightens the corners. And all that does is by darkening the corners, you're drawing the viewer's eye into the middle. And typically you can adjust the parameters of the vignette. You can have it be a really soft edge, so it looks like it's just been burnt in a little bit, or you can have more hard edge to make it look more like a frame. Okay, well that concludes the presentation portion of the presentation. I hope it didn't go too fast. There was a lot of ground to cover. I am open and I'd love to hear your questions. Let me go over the text really quick. Okay, so talking about the overhead light, turn off the light. Turn off the light and turn on a desk lamp, turn on a side light, open or get to a window if possible, or open the window if possible. Top-down reflections, horrible, especially with plexiglass. It's so nasty. Sometimes you just can't get around it, honestly. I mean, especially with plexi. And if that's the case, do your best to get as much overhead light turned off as possible. And that's the best thing you can do.
This is Agent. That was my question.
Yeah,
May
please.
I respond to that real quick?
Absolutely.
So I think I might be able to open a window, as you mentioned, but if there is a strong overhead light, to avoid reflections in my experimentation, it seems like the only way to avoid it is to take a picture from the side. So would a 3/4 view potentially work even if you do have an overhead light?
Oh yes, absolutely. And especially when you're talking about a shiny piece of plexi that's very reflective, that angle, you're going to see it. You're going to be able to move around and you're going to see where it's a mirror. So just get to an angle that doesn't physically have the reflection. And what you're taking a picture of, that reflection, is you're taking a picture of the reflection. I know that sounds kind of silly, but if you're able to get off axis, off angle, and you can actually watch that reflection move physically off the plexi, then yes, absolutely shoot at angle. Anybody else? Oh, tripods. That's interesting. Okay. Yeah. The images that I shoot that are overhead, the big one, the ones that I shoot of all the game components are absolutely on the tripod. I find for those ones in particular, I'm flying the camera between 4 and 6 feet, and there's a lot of styling that goes in. So I lock the camera down and I slowly just adjust 1 or 2 items, take a picture, and go back and forth. Tripods, in terms of shooting at the game table, I haven't found them very necessary, especially with more modern cameras, because the ISO can either be adjusted manually, or with phone cameras, it's adjusted internally, and I typically haven't found that I needed them, to be honest. If you want to go, actually, Michael, do you want to expand on that just a little bit? If he's here. Michael, are you there? Oh, sorry. No worries, no worries. So, yeah, so I really haven't found the tripod very necessary for in-game play. I shoot a lot what's called wide open. So when I shoot with the bigger cameras, like so, I'll have the aperture be really wide, which lets a whole lot of light in, and I can shoot a little bit faster. When I shoot with the iPhone, like I said, the iPhone is designed to get you an image. It's pre-built into the technology that it will increase the ISO automatically for you. I think you can, there's third-party camera apps that you can buy and download that you can adjust the ISO. ISO is just the sensitivity of your sensor. The higher ISO number, the more sensitive it will have. It'll work in darker, in a darker setting. Yeah, I recently started a channel, and many of my after action reports consist of still images with narration. So any additional tips and tricks of sharp language? Okay. Ryan, did you get a chance to hear about pairing your images with text early on? It was kind of early on in the chat.
Yeah, I did. It'll be interesting because a lot of times when I'm filming, I don't know, I like to balance it. I don't want the doing, basically when I film, I don't want it to interrupt playing the game. I don't want to be worrying about, positions and stuff like that. So I usually snap pictures of what's happening, and then I'll write up something and then
Okay.
narrate afterwards. So I guess it's not necessarily going to be text, but it'll be narration or voiceover,
Of
which
course.
could definitely help images.
Of course, and that's a whole different area of adding text images that I didn't actually cover, because I was talking about really single images, and what you're talking about is having a breadth of images that talk about an after action, and then it's very specific sequence of talking points. So yeah, that's different. Actually, I haven't done that before with the doing the after actions. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, as Plexi, I'm so sorry, guys. Plexi is just a pain in the ass. If possible, side light as much as you can. The lower the angle of the light, the less reflection you're going to have. Yeah. I mean, I get that question quite a bit, and it's something that happens to me. And I'll even take the desk lamp and I'll stick it on the ground at times just to get that lower light. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Any other thing you guys want to talk about? We can talk about equipment if you want to. We can go. I can go back over anything that I glossed over too quickly.
So I have 3 more questions, but I'm trying not to hog the floor here.
No,
They're
hog,
mostly
please.
simple
Yeah.
questions. Well, really quick question. Where is this recording going to be posted? On your Twitter account or somewhere else?
Yeah, so I'm definitely going to post it on my Twitter. I'm also going to have a link. We'll go to Harold, and I think he's going to have, I think other people are also recording various sessions this weekend, and I'm sure he's going to have a space for downloads. I'm also going to give this to Gene at GMT, and he'll have it in the next December's update. So I'll put I'll put a message out to everybody who's attending, say here are the various areas or ways you can download it. But it will be on I will post it to my Twitter.
It's a chat question about, do you set up shots more to limit time in post?
Absolutely, 100%. I've always done that, whether I'm shooting games, a little bit fine art, but more on the professional side. Fine art is the creativity happens a lot in the dark room. But in terms of limiting post, absolutely. Yep, I crop as much as I can in camera just because I want a lot of information. I don't like to spend a whole lot of time on the computer. I mean, I want to keep it kind of tight. And so I tend to shoot a little bit on the flatter side, which just means I try to get detail in the highlights and detail in the shadows. I'll pump in contrast, and that's really about it. Yeah, I don't spend a whole lot of time in post.
Scott, thanks again for that. And then follow up to that text question I had. Again, back to the first point on story and what is your story. I remember so vividly 30 years ago, almost now, I think, when the Civil War series came out from Ken Burns, and he used the still image with motion.
Yeah.
Probably no motion picture then. What is that called? And because I look at not only the stills like you're doing that you're sharing with us, but then also moving to motion, but not necessarily fully to motion picture, but still motion, I guess.
Yeah, so that's actually called the Ken Burns effect, and there's various editing suites that you can use that can apply that. Yeah, so just look up Ken Burns effect. That's all that is. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
You betcha. Yeah. Anybody else have any questions? Want to chit chat about anything?
My other two questions.
Please shoot.
Found the tip to elevate. Okay, so actually I have a question about what Michael Kirk just mentioned.
Okay.
I think during the styling section,
Yes.
you mentioned putting cardboard under a flat element, but
Yes.
I didn't 100% understand what you're saying. I think what you're saying is that if you had like boards stacked on top of each other, you put cardboard in between so that you could see a visible shadow. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So if this is, whatever card, this is whatever playing card, I will physically put a piece of foam core or cardboard, and so it's layered like that.
So like a 1/4 inch or less?
No, any less. I'm gonna guess. Gosh, I want to say more than maybe 3/16 to a 1/4, but nothing more. It does depend on your shadow. I have been. Somebody said that I rendered one of the images once, so I thought that was kind of funny because of all the shadows and so forth. I had to go on and say, no, I use cardboard and it built the shadows that way. I say anything more than a 1/4, you're going to get the shadow is going to be too big and it's going to look like it's flying off the board. What you want is just a little bit of a shadow, so nothing over a 1/4 inch. Yeah.
Okay. And then my last question
just
was
before you ask the next question, I want to also comment that your shadow length is going to be dependent on how high your light source is. So the higher the light source, the shorter your shadow is going to be. The lower the light source, the longer your shadow is going to be. Okay, answer your next question.
And then final question. And yes, thank you very much for your time here. It's been quite educational. So you mentioned parallel lines being bad, such as the edge of the table being parallel to the edge of the frame. It's a thing it's not easy for me to pay attention to.
Yeah.
However, I did notice that in several of the example pictures, it seemed that the board itself was either parallel or very nearly parallel to the edge of the image, but it was separated by the play space. So I was wondering, is the board an exception to that rule, or does it require separation?
It can be. I think what I've found is if I'm shooting the board and I have extra play space, I'm not so mindful of off camera. If I'm really tucked in tight to the board, I just don't like necessarily that. And I'm not talking about the overhead shots of all the ingredients. That's a different thing. What I'm talking about is in play. I typically, if it's right to the edge of the, I typically like to go over. But if the board is inside, I think it's okay. It's okay to have those boundaries that are bigger, and then you'll have the parallel lines, and it's not so distracting. When the board is like right to the edge and it's just super parallel, if it's off just a little bit, it's just going to look a little. It's going to look a little wonky. It's going to look a little sloppy.
It's going to look like thin stripes, basically.
Exactly, and it's super, super hard, especially with an iPhone or a camera phone, to get really parallel lines, because those lenses are incredibly wide, and a wide lens is going to arc. It's just natural. It's just what it is. It's the physics of the lens. I mean, a normal lens for this is not with a camera, not the lens in the camera. So consequently, then what you get these little bit of arcs, and it just doesn't look, even though you think it's really parallel, it just doesn't look very well. So like I commented on the dust, if it looks like dust, and this I'm calling, metaphorically calling that dust. If it looks like dust, then it is dust, it's dirt. And this is an example of that. So if you just go off just a little bit, you're going to force it. And now the viewer knows that you purposely, cantilevered, you got rid of the parallel lines. And it looks a little bit better. It's one of those visual rules. And I hate the word rules, but there's things that visually happen whether it's a painting, an etching, or a photograph this is just more pleasant. One of them is, we didn't really talk about, one of them is the rule of thirds. If you're at the third of any of the frame, it just looks so much more pleasing than necessarily being right in the middle. It just works. It works whether it's painting or a photograph.
Thank you very much.
Of
I think
course.
if I had any last request, it would be if you could bring that slide back up with the 2 foam core cards and the flashlight. I wanted to take a picture of that.
Oh, of course.
I imagine it'll be a while until the recording goes up. And then I will yield the floor to any other questions.
Let me get this guy up.
Got it. Thank you.
You betcha. Oh, no problem, eh? Yeah, we'll get this up, and probably sometime, hopefully the next month or so. I might add a little extra bit here or there. Just I'll go back over and edit it, make sure I didn't gloss over things I had written notes about. I might be the last person in the world to do. I think this is my first Zoom group meeting. I think I'm the last person in the world to host one. So I appreciate you guys being here and being patient with me. This has been fantastic. You bet, Aaron. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Maple Lady. I appreciate it. Thanks, Michael. That was my hope, Toshiku, that there's some form of education going on. Okay. Oh, yeah, please. Is it Shoshin?
It's Jochen or Jochen.
Jochen, okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Scott. You had mentioned early on when you kind of gave us a little bit of your bio, when you had said that the GMT and other things you've done have led to other things or more things. Have your other projects and other offers led you to do similar things, or have they also sent you in other directions as well?
No, I was talking specifically that that it's led to a deeper appreciation to game photography, which I've only seen 1 or 2 other people professionally doing game photography in the same way. Basically, what I had done is I approached Gene with the concept not just of photographing the games as a commercial project, to help them sell games. I wanted to also, because I'm a game player, so I wanted to merge the two. I wanted to show accurate in-game procedure. I wanted to show a game accurately in the middle of play. And so if this unit is here and this unit is here, I wanted to make sure that, that showed accurately. And then add my professional expertise on top of it so I could photograph it in a pleasing way. And so what that led to after a couple months of doing it and shooting their games, like, this is really fun. And I enjoyed sharing that with other people, even flat pieces of cardboard, and a game, which is just a fun hobby, can be presented pleasantly. And I could apply the same skill set that I've passionately been following and using for so many years to a hobby that I'm quite in love with. So it didn't lead on to other professional endeavors, but it did lead on to a deeper appreciation for the craft within this little niche market that I didn't anticipate getting into. Like I said earlier, my other work is wandering around the mountains and shooting trees and hiking in the backcountry and just with my black and white film camera. So this is a completely different avenue, but I find it creatively at times as interesting, because the commercial photography is all about solving problems, and there's a lot of fun little technical problems that come up, and so hope that answers your question.
Oh no, that is really terrific. In fact, now that you shared a little bit more about the other stuff you do, I can see how this was a great offshoot to go into, which is another hobby and love. I'm always interested in what what fires people up down the road.
Absolutely, me too. Yeah, totally agree.
What two more questions.
Sure.
First one is, what's your magic in getting rid of lint and dust particles in your shots? Because they're so clean.
Yeah, I'll show you. 1 second. I have two things. I have a little air rocket, which is just you squeeze it and just shoots out air. And then I have the standard dust. This thing I don't really like to use all that much because you get it off Access and you spray just Freon and it just can make a nasty stain. So typically just this little guy, and you can come in and just do a little tiny squirt. You get this on Amazon. Just look up air rocket or yeah, I don't even know what they're actually called. You shouldn't have a hard time hunting them down, but
Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
yeah.
in fact, and the pressure probably isn't too much to actually displace too many of your pieces.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's and as you well know, some of these games like one little shift and like oh gosh.
I was just imagining using an air duster compressed can and just
Oh,
30
it's-
chits going onto the floor.
Oh yeah, this thing is yeah. I rarely I don't like this on camera gear. I use it when I scan. That's typically my primary use for it. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and then the last part, the last section was, again, when Gene had announced that you were going to be doing, adding to the GMT experience on the website, et cetera. Of course, had no idea who you were, but and the way that your images have slowly populated throughout, not just on the homepage and that rotating splash across the top, but throughout in every, when you click on a game, there are already lots of your images there. And the richness and quality of that, it makes you, I don't know, I can't describe it, but it's just fantastic.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That means
great work.
that means more than you can know. It's fantastic, and it's nice to hear. Yeah, it's nice, and we're all very visual people, I imagine. Being a professional photographer, I'm extremely visual, and I often get as excited about the visuals of a game as I do about the mechanics or the narrative. And so you see cool pictures of a game you don't have, and it'd be like, ooh, that's really enticing. So I appreciate those comments. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks again, Scott.
You betcha. Yeah.
Scott, you mentioned landscape photography and wandering out in the woods. I have no idea if you're someone who would ever play video games or not, but a random note on that, if you ever play something on Steam, there's a game called Firewatch.
Firewatch.
It's Firewatch. It's basically about you're a fire watchman in the northern woods and you're not taking pictures, but it is very much about wandering beautiful woodland landscapes. And I think it's something you would appreciate from the visual side of things.
I'll take a look at it. That's awesome.
Take a look at it.
I will. Thank you. There's I did find oh gosh, I don't know when it came out, 20, 30 years ago, not a video game, but a board game about woodland firefighters. And it's a solo game. I don't know what it's called, but the fire, like basically you play against the fire and it slowly creeps in. It gets pretty bad reviews. And I think it's not probably the most elegant of games, but it's always been in the back of my head to hunt it down. Okay, that's cool. Please, I'm here for as long as you guys need me, so don't be shy. I know there's other things probably going on tonight too, so.
Yeah, the Ken Burns effect was mentioned earlier, and like I said, I've started a channel recently, and it's really interesting when I go in to make like an after-action report. It also ties into the narrative power of games, especially solitaire games like The Hunters or Silent Victory. I love doing a playthrough of that and then writing up like an after-action report. And so it adds another element to the photography, because I'll take a picture and then, you can do the zooming and the slide effect.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Sub, or like to highlight like torpedoes being fired or something like that. So
that's it. Yeah, that's all. Yep. And that's it. You're isolating your subject and you're doing it with that particular effect. You can do it with focus, you can do it with the effect, you can do it with lighting. That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Well, cool, guys. I mean, unless anybody else has any other questions, we say we wrap it up. I can hang around for as long as anybody needs me to. Okay. Well, I really appreciate everybody being here. And I look forward to running into you guys at other cons or future events or online. And please don't be afraid to email or hesitate to email. I'm here to answer questions. I love photography. I love talking about it. I love games. I love talking about that. So it was a pleasure meeting everybody.
Thanks for taking the time.